My name is Tim McIlrath, and I play in the band Rise Against.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. Your latest album, Ricochet, is set for release in August. And you've always
Hmm.
been politically conscious, but Ricochet seems more inwardly focused too. What did you discover about yourself during its writing process?
Oh, that's a good question. I think going into a 10th album, it's the first time I've really considered like the number of albums we've actually made before.
Yeah.
I think before that, it wasn't something I thought about. And hitting those double digits, you realize, okay, like we've really made our name, we have our reputation, we've ticked a lot of the boxes that we set out to tick. Um, and now what is it we still want to do? Like, what is there left to do?
Yeah.
Um, and I think with that came a lot of like freedom to sort of just write whatever is kind of on the top of your skull at that moment. You know what I mean? And I think
Mm.
that's kind of where this one came out. It came out as just sort of like less like we must tick these boxes and more like what are you feeling right now? What do you want to write right now? And I think that's kind of what it's been with Rise Against. It's sort of we have we don't shy away from a political side of this band. We're playing a band called Rise Against, and
Yeah,
then we
exactly.
also have songs like our fans know like it's far more complicated than and complex because people were far more complicated as complex, like all of us, And so there are songs out there. Some of our most popular songs, like when you really put them under the microscope, they aren't political at all. They're just
Yeah.
kind of um, about life and love and loss and all those things. And so this record was, I think, just sort of like don't go in with any sort of preset idea of what you want to do. Just kind of just don't overthink it and just do it.
Yeah, yeah. Sort of what's there in the moment. Let's capture that.
Yes, that's kind of what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And was there a particular event that was the sort of catalyst for this album?
Mm. There was no real like event. This was like a lot of us, we were coming out of like a post-COVID world. You know what I mean? We had like made our album Know Our Generation, like a lot of bands, like it took us a long time to finally get it out and get it around the world and properly toured all the places that we would like to tour in. And so I think this was sort of like a bit of a all right, oof, we made it through that crazy time of all of our lives, and like what's next? Like what's happening in the world next? What did we learn about ourselves as a society in that time? Like um what are some of the good things and the positive things that came out of that? And then what are some of the negative things that came out of that whole world too? Just like, that we learned about some of the darker sides of like the internet and misinformation and that kind of thing. And are we ready for the next pandemic, when Mother Nature and science inevitably creates it?
Yeah.
And so I think all those things were kind of like swirling around as we put this album together.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting. How like current events kind of can influence you, but at the same time, you're saying like they weren't anything. There wasn't something in specific, like specifically that made you guys go, "We need to do this album." It was just like a culmination of everything going on.
Yeah, I think that we're always like, I think no matter where we are, we're always suppressing an album. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's always happening. The next album is always kind of happening. It's happening tonight here in Sweden, when we'll watch like the opening band and they'll like inspire us, or like it'll happen on a day off when we're just hanging out and watching the news or just seeing the way the world interacts. So like there's always a new album like bubbling up, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
so like it's always a document of like where we are at that moment.
Yeah. And speaking just quickly on other bands, are there any bands at the
Mm.
moment that you're really into and really just loving or inspired by at the moment?
I guess the obvious one because I'm wearing their T-shirt. Spiritual Cramp. We just saw them in Germany last week, and we took them on tour pretty much around the world. Like we did the U.S. and we did a lot of Europe, and I'd love to bring them to Australia. Um, they're such a fun, cool live like band that's really killing it at the moment. They remind me of like a young us, and
Yep.
so yeah, definitely watching them. We just spent a lot of time with them and LS Dunes this year, and LS Dunes are just old friends.
Yeah.
And so watching those bands like every night was like cool to see. Just your buddies killing it every night.
Yeah, yeah, crazy. And this is going to sound really fake fan of me, but I only just discovered that you were in Armor Angeles, like when you first started out. I had no idea.
Yeah. It's like that was Chicago back in the day was a pretty small world. And so I
Yeah,
grew up with like the Alkaline Trio guys, and I grew up with Pete and Patrick. We did play in a band together briefly, but we were always at like we were like before that band even started, like we were always at shows together. Like Pete and I were always at the same shows. It's in the hardcore scene. We were both like straight edge kids, like
Yeah.
listening to Earth Crisis and Strife and like that part of the hardcore scene. And so it was cool to see everybody kind of come out of that world. 'Cause I feel like a lot of the bands, a lot of people I was hanging out with turned into like Alkaline Trio, turned into Pelican, turned
Mhm.
into Fall Out Boy, obviously. There was a lot of Chicago was a really fun place to be like around that time.
Yeah, and I also love it because I do also, in those bands that you mentioned, hear the political undertones. It seems like there's something in the water there. You guys are really, wanting to put your voices out there and use your platforms. It's great.
Yeah, 90s hardcore was like all of us kind of going to the same school in that sense. Like, and 90s hardcore was like political and like sometimes hyper political. And it was the first time I learned about like I really learned about like indigenous cultures and sweatshops and
Yeah.
issues that involved the environment and climate change. Like there was a lot of the bands were using the stages as more than a place just to sell records or sell tickets. They were trying to introduce you to like animal rights, and that kind of stuff. So it really was like a secondary education. So we were in those same audiences together, and I love it. I love seeing Fall Out Boy take over the world. I love seeing all these bands like still people still doing what they do, and even people that didn't end up doing things musically. Like I have friends who became like human rights lawyers or like they became great teachers. You know what I mean? In public schools. You know what I mean? Like people that came out of that world took something from that world and that the hardcore scene. I find it crops up in so many parts of like the industry. Like the
Yeah.
guy who designed our last record, Nowhere Generation. I found out like we'd been at some of the same shows back in the day. Now he's like a huge designer, designing for like Lady Gaga and Sam Smith and stuff. And so it's like it really was a cool culture that kind of very DIY. It
Mm.
kind of taught you like if you want something, like go and do it and take it and don't wait for anybody to like formally invite you. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think those are like in the end, those were like good life lessons for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing. Yeah, when you mentioned how many great things and people came out of Chicago.
Yeah, it was a fun place to be in the 90s for
Yeah,
sure.
that's awesome. And what's one belief or worldview you held 10 years ago that's completely changed for you now and that has crept into your writing?
Oh my gosh, a worldview I held 10 years ago that has completely changed. Okay.
Yeah, big
I
question.
guess like I guess what has changed mostly is like I think that so speaking of this like world that we grew up in, the punk and hardcore world in the 90s, and then having Rise Against and bands like Fall Out Boy, whatever, we kind of grew out of that world. I think
Hmm.
like there was a point where you were so used to being in a room with people that were like-minded, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
That you started to think that that's what that room was always going to be. You were always going to play for people that were like-minded. You were always going to play for um an audience that was mostly on the same page. And I think the critics would call that like preaching to the converted, right? You know what I mean? You're just kind of like you're just all just talking to each other like that. And I think whereas maybe I had made those assumptions, I now don't make those assumptions. I now know that like the world is far more polarized, and even our own fan base is far more polarized. And so I know that our politics will land on some fans and they will ruffle the feathers of other fans. You know what I mean? I think that's okay. It's a good thing actually if we can find spaces where we can coexist together because there are too many places now that we are so siloed and we don't get to communicate. And I think when we communicate in real life, we find out that we have a far more in common than we are, just sit talking to each other on the internet. And
Yeah,
so I think music can be that place. And so I don't assume that someone is on like my side or my page or agrees with my band. I don't
yeah,
assume that we have the same ideas of what a revolution is. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
so, but with that comes like to me like a bigger responsibility to more clearly define what I think revolution is, like what I think change is. To make sure that someone doesn't think I'm on their side when actually I'm singing against the exact opposite things that they are advocating for.
yeah, yeah, so true. Great answer, by the way. Do you ever get scared about being so politically open?
No, I guess it's sort of like the path that we've sort of chosen, you know what I mean, in a way. So like, um, I think fear doesn't really factor into it. Like there's crazy people in this world, you know what I mean? And I think that I remember the first time Rise Against got death threats
Ugh.
was like so long ago that it
Mhm,
kind of made you think like, all right, do we want to do this? Is this still worth it to do it? You know what I mean? Should we be backing away? Should we be responding to these things?
mhm.
And then I realized like, no, I'm not going to respond to this. Like I'm gonna just do what I do. You know what I mean? Because to respond is to kind of back down from it all. And so we're just gonna continue being part of the solution.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And how do you personally avoid burnout, especially as someone who's been speaking truth to power for over 2 decades in a high stakes, high emotion way?
Oh man. Well, I guess like the simple answer is I don't. You know what I mean? Like burnout is normal. It happens to all of us. Like don't feel like a freak if it happens to you. Like
Yeah,
we all get frustrated. We all want things to change. And there are all moments where we feel like things aren't changed or maybe they're going backwards, you know what I mean? Like like those moments will happen to you if you are engaged in ideas and of change and awareness and that kind of thing. But you find the silver linings, you know what I mean? Like, and for me it's easy because like I get to go on stage every night. I'll go on stage tonight here in Gothenburg and I get to see people from Sweden, you know, so far away from me and speaking a different language that are resonating with some of the things that we're singing about. And so I will walk away inspired by that and then connect that audience to Stockholm and then to Oslo and then to Germany this weekend and like and all the way to like Australia and Melbourne and Sydney. And I realized, oh my gosh, we are all connected in this amazing way and this is cool. And so I think that's something I try to remind our crowds at night, like, listen, like you guys aren't alone. You know what I mean? Like this is there's so many of us and there are more of us. And that's kind of the way I look at the world now is that I think that there are people in this world with a very shitty vision of the future and they are
mhm,
fighting for that vision. I think those people are very loud right now. But I think there are more people with this really cool, beautiful vision of all of us coexisting, and that we just aren't as loud. And that's it's as simple as that. Because I do
yeah.
think there are more of us than there are of them, and we just need to be a little bit louder and kind of own those spaces a little more.
Yeah, I so agree. And I can feel that as someone who doesn't want a shitty future. I can definitely feel it.
Right.
Feel like our voices are maybe drowned out a little bit, unfortunately, but hopefully,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah.
And last question. I've got so many questions, but so little time. Um,
All good.
is there a chance of an Aussie tour that you know of?
Oh well, yes. So we are conspiring as we speak.
Wicked.
Um, Australia is really it's kind of our main focus right now because we already know that we're playing a lot of the same places and we are focusing on getting back to Australia because we need to squeeze that in the calendar. So I can't say when exactly because everything is changing, but it is definitely it is being talked about on a weekly basis is when are we getting to Australia? So
Oh, wicked. That's so exciting. Oh,
mhm.
we can't wait. Tim, thank you so much. We can't wait for the world to hear Ricochet. Thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Thanks so much.